used to want to save the world. This beautiful place. But the closer you get, the more you see the great darkness within. I learned this the hard way, a long time ago.
Hello and welcome to Film Rant. I'm not even going to beat around the bush here. DC have finally gone and fucking done it. They finally made a good addition to the DC universe, which is a little sad for me in a way. I mean, it's a lot easier to review a movie when it's an absolute shower of shit dripping onto a derailing train that charges into a car crash, but I have to say I'm glad that DC have finally pulled it out the bag on this one. I'm going to talk about how Patty Jenkins has done this in this review, but I will be discussing spoilers, so lasso your ass down to the cinema and check it out if you don't want anything spoiled. First we'll talk about our lead character Diana, played by Gal Gadot. I thought Gadot gave a very solid performance throughout the movie and managed to balance an act of seriousness, power, innocence and fun. Gadot had the ability to really bring the character to life and she was unquestionably the lady for the role. She was one of the few highlights of Batman v Superman, so well done to the cast and crew for her. As for her character, it was charming to see a character so innocent yet so powerful all in one go, a little like Baby Groot. She has this kind of wide-eyed wonder at the outside world while also being fully aware she could kick anyone's ass into the new 52. Diana is incredibly naive, which plays heavily into the film's message, but it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and I really loved her character and it was easy to get on board with her motivations. It was also easy to get on board with her romance with Chris Pine. Chris's character Steve Trevor seemed just as fun as Diana, but with a much more realistic view of the world. It's clear to see that Steve wants to share Diana's innocent and naive ambitions and chooses to try and believe in them as best he can. Ultimately, he's already faced the grim realities of war, so he's still somewhat grounded, but Diana represents hope and positivity, and I think Steve needs that after some of the shit he's seen. It was easy to ship their romance because the personalities actually matched. These were two characters who I think would actually get together in real life, not just two people thrust together by crazy circumstances. Now don't get me wrong, they were thrust together by crazy circumstances, but their characters were just so well written for each other that I truly feel like they belong together. It also helps that one happens to look like Gal Gadot and the other happens to look like Chris Pine. I mean, their children would be sexier than pepperoni pizza. When they're older, I mean. I don't mean... never mind. As for the supporting characters, Chief wasn't really explored that much. He was probably the only disappointing addition. I don't really know anything about him. Samir was a funny guy and had some great comic relief moments, even if he did come across as a bit creepy, and Charlie had the most character and was the best character exploration. He was a soldier clearly suffering from PTSD who clearly struggled to help the team in firefights. He's a beaten down man, quite literally the first time we see him, but especially mentally. He doesn't really do anything to move the plot along, but he was certainly given the most backstory without ever telling us it directly. You just know he's seen some shit. So Chief is basically a ghost, Samir has the vibrant and funny personality, and Charlie is the best character piece. As side characters, I was mostly happy with them. As for the villains, General Ludendorff and Dr. Poison were almost clones of Red Skull and Dr. Zola from Captain America. One is the strong German military leader, while the other is the little evil doctor who makes a whole host of terrors in a lab. Ludendorff and Poison weren't given too much screen time other than just scenes to show us that they're definitely the bad guys. I mean, in a war movie it's easy to make villains because you simply say that they're on the other side to our protagonist and that's usually enough. But in comic book movies I always want a little more story for my villains. Wonder Woman doesn't give you much backstory on either of them, but that's understandable in the end given that Ludendorff gets absolutely fucking wrecked by Wonder Woman in a matter of minutes. I've had turds that were harder to get rid of. But that's when the movie brings in Ares, the real villain who was hiding in plain sight. There's not much to Ares except he's an all-powerful god who wants to see all humans wiped out because we're ignorant and destroy our planet and yada 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 generic stuff. I didn't like Ares at all, and his addition was pretty much the only thing stopping this movie from being truly great. As for the script, it's very clear that Wonder Woman has a message and ideology that it wants to get across. Diana is convinced that there's only war in the world because the god of war Ares poisoned the hearts of some men and turned them evil. Chris Pine is constantly telling her, "Bitch, you crazy, some people are just dicks," but she's not having it. Eventually she kills Ludendorff, who she thinks is Ares, and surprise surprise, nothing changes. That's when Chris Pine finally convinces her that, aye, Some people are just bellends. It's a shame that this is set in World War I because she knows some people are just twats if she ever saw Justin Bieber. He also then explains to her that killing one person isn't going to stop a war, regardless of who they are. You can't stop an ideology by targeting one guy. I thought that was a very interesting idea to bring up in today's world, a world where we killed Osama bin Laden to try and eradicate terrorism. Didn't do too much, did it? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that wasn't the right thing to do, but we still have lots of terrorism in the world. If you think I'm way off the mark with that opinion, then fair enough, I'm not going to proclaim to be an expert on war and history, but that's just my take on it. Terrorism is an ideology, and that's what Pine's character was saying. You can't destroy an ideology by killing one person. Even if someone kills the leader of ISIS, that won't stop them the way killing Ares stopped the Germans in this movie. The war on terror is a complex mess, and I thought this movie had an interesting take on that kind of war. But then it goes completely against its own ideals and brings Ares into the fray. He's real after all. Wonder Woman kills him and ends World War I because of that. So Chris Pine was wrong? People aren't just dicks and Ares really was in control all along? Wonder Woman really fucked itself over by adding in Ares. I get that it needed a more climactic battle, but maybe it would have been bittersweet if she had a big battle with Ludendorff and after she emerged victorious she's disappointed that she hasn't ended the war. That's when Pine steps in and says, "Aye, people are dicks man, but don't worry, you really helped a lot. We can win the war now." She could have then become a symbol for the soldiers to push on and win, a little like Captain America. Wonder Woman was so close to greatness but just fell short at the final hurdle by throwing its own ideas down the shitter. This brings me on to say that I imagine this script will maybe piss off a few people because of how liberal it is. Now for me, I'm totally on board with everything Wonder Woman says about the world. I agree with most of its statements. However, it's clear that it vastly oversimplifies the world's problems and sometimes comes across as very naive. Diana professes that love can save the world, which is cheesier than a Hugh Grant rom-com, but I can appreciate the sentiment of it. Diana believes in the goodness of people and that's a great thing, but in a war movie that comes across as both charming and childish. However, seeing the pure innocence of Diana, not tainted by a troubled world, interact with the very fucked up world was wonderful. The scenes in London were also great. That's when she's first introduced to gender stereotypes, and when looking at dresses she asks, how do women fight in these? I enjoyed that transformation between her being the dominant sex in her world to being seen as the weaker sex in this one, even though she's just as badass as anyone. The only problem is that she offers these really idealistic solutions that just don't work in the real world, but they work in Wonder Woman. Just kill the evil god of war and everyone will return to having tea and cupcakes in the street. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works. When I say that Wonder Woman oversimplifies a lot of problems, I'm referencing a few scenes in particular, specifically the scene where she walks over no man's land. It was a fantastic scene, seeing her climb over, deflect all the bullets and wipe out a few Germans on the other side, but the movie puts it across as if she's solved the entire no man's land standoff in that one scene. We all know that no man's land was much more complex than that and couldn't be solved by one powerful hero walking over. Maybe I'm just looking far too much into this, and sorry if this is all a bit heavy and maybe I'm completely misinformed in my opinion here. Maybe I should just revert to my usual self. Ha ha ha! Funny similes and mildly offensive jokes and dicks and stuff. Look, I'm not saying the movie's message was a good or bad thing. I'm just saying it has a very idealistic and simplistic viewpoint on the world and how to solve its problems. And to be honest, I find it charming that it's so upfront with those views and I can totally get on board with the message it's trying to convey. Love thy neighbour. And in all seriousness, what's so wrong with that? That said, I like that Wonder Woman didn't try to be all artsy and deep. Now I know this movie has just made me talk about ISIS and how love by itself can't solve the world problems, but as I said, it's upfront about those ideas. The previous DC Universe movies have always been handled by Zack Snyder, who loves to be artsy and deep. The only problem is, Zack Snyder is about as deep as a 13-year-old My Chemical Romance fan. Plus, he always tries to hide his message under thinly veiled dialogue and overcomplicated plots. It was refreshing to see Patty Jenkins take the reins and just throw a message right in your face, and what do you know? It worked. Wonder Woman has been vastly better received than Man of Steel, Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad, so she must be doing something right. I wish it wasn't Zack Snyder doing Justice League. I mean, he's gonna fuck it up, isn't he? He's gonna fuck it up. Getting into somewhat lighter territory, I thought the comedy scattered throughout Wonder Woman was great. It was thoroughly well written, came in at the right times and was brilliantly acted by all involved. Lucy Davis as Etta was especially charming and Samir was full of personality and character. Gal Gadot also had some brilliant comedic timing and her jokes landed well. We all know Chris Pine is capable of good comedy and it's the same in this movie. That dude is a criminally underrated actor. I love the guy. But yeah, for once a DC movie wasn't a drab mess full of exposition and depressing themes. Wonder Woman is full of hope, and the light-hearted comedy throughout definitely goes hand in hand with that theme. Suicide Squad was also full of comedy, but it was the haha these people are batshit crazy kind of comedy, as opposed to the innocent and charming comedy we see in Wonder Woman. I have to mention the Chris Pine death scene too. You know, the one where he goes full on Dark Knight Rises and dies in an aircraft carrying deadly bombs away from the major population zones, except in this movie Chris Pine actually kicks the bucket and doesn't turn up in a cafe in Paris a few months later without any fucking explanation! For God's sake, Christopher Nolan, that still pisses me off to this day. You should have just done what the Joker said and killed the Batman. But this review isn't about that, so yeah. Pine's death was very sad. I think we had enough time spent with him to get invested in his character, and I was fully invested in his relationship with Diana. I was fully expecting him to die as it made more sense for the plot, but that didn't stop it being sad. Now, keeping something incredibly predictable still sad is a testament to the acting and direction of the movie, so Wonder Woman scores big points there. Wonder Woman also really shines in its action scenes. Every single one of them is exhilarating and fiercely entertaining to watch. The fight choreography is top notch and everything is shot well. It's easy to see everything that's going on. The movie uses a lot of slow-mo shots in these scenes, but I'd be lying like Theresa May if I didn't say they look damn cool. The slow-mo shots mixed in with Wonder Woman's awesome theme were electric. I mentioned earlier about the No Man's Land scene, and while I mentioned a potential problem with it in regards to the movie's message, I enjoyed the scene at face value. I got chills when she climbed over the trench and the music came in as she charged towards the enemy. Watching her deflect the gunfire, jumping around and using her whip was amazing. It's a shame the Wonder Woman theme didn't kick in for the first time there as she climbed out the trench, but I can live with what we got. From a technical standpoint, I have to say the soundtrack in Wonder Woman is absolutely solid. I think we can all agree that one of the highlights from Batman v Superman was the badass Wonder Woman theme, and that obviously makes a return in this movie. It's bolstered by a strong orchestral score that elicits the right emotions in you at just the right time. A movie score is designed to evoke an emotional response in the audience to help deliver the emotional drama of the scene. Lots of movies have soundtracks that make you feel indifferent, and so scenes lose a bit of oomph. Wonder Woman has exactly the right tracks for each scene, and the music affected me in the right way. I actually took notice of it, and that's a great sign for a soundtrack. Composer Rupert Gregson-Williams did a bang-up job here. Now as for the visual effects, they're a little all over the place. Some scenes are really well done with lots of polish, while others are startlingly obvious. Wonder Woman's whip always looks good, and a lot of the visual effects during fights look solid too. The most obvious effects are the green screen shots. For whatever reason, Wonder Woman features some very poor green screen work. I'm not talking Superman 4 levels of poor green screen, but only just marginally better than Lord of the Rings. Now, Lord of the Rings is a great film trilogy, but they were made between 2001 and 2003, and Wonder Woman really doesn't look that much better in some shots. Sometimes it's clear when Gal Gadot has been replaced with a CG double too, and it's a bit off-putting. So overall, Wonder Woman is a movie that is exhilarating and relatively simple with some good characters and excellent performances from the cast. It's very forthcoming about its political views on the world, and while everything is a little oversimplified in its message, I can appreciate what it's saying, and at least it's not a muddled mess spoken in riddles like the shite Zack Snyder puts out. Wonder Woman has solid comedy that uses the talents of all its cast and playfully messes around with the position of a woman in the era of World War I. Diana's juxtaposition of innocence and ferocity is wonderful to witness, and it's one of the main pluses of the movie. The action scenes are fantastically fun to watch, even if they're let down by some poor special effects, but the whole movie is bolstered by an excellent soundtrack that really draws you in. The biggest flaw in the movie is the introduction of Ares, which completely undermines the biggest theme and conflict, and as a result it ruins its own message by going against itself. It's good that that flaw is only one of the few that this movie has, but it's a pretty big one, so it can't go unnoticed. It's that big fuck up that just manages to slightly ruin this movie for me. It's like looking at a beautiful wedding cake, and as you circle around it you notice that your little shit of a nephew has punched a big hole in the other side of it, and it just takes the beauty out of the whole thing. Wonder Woman almost became one of the best superhero movies I've ever seen, but that big bollock dropped at the end pulled it down a bit for me. However, fair play to DC with this one. They've finally made a good, wholesome movie that doesn't make me want to jump off a bridge after it. I have hope for DC's future now, except Justice League, because, well, Snyder! Wonder Woman gets 4 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.